Imagine a machine built on bold promises, an engine without pistons, power that spun instead of pumped, and a sound so strange it turned heads before it even came into view. It was supposed to be smoother, faster, cleaner, the future itself humming under chrome and steel. But the dream of effortless revolution met the realities of heat, cost, and confusion. A few wrote it and swore by it. Most simply didn't understand what it was trying to be. Yet decades later, its ghost still whispers through engineering circles and collectors' garages, a what-if story sealed in metal. This is the tale of a motorcycle that dared to rewrite the rules of combustion and paid the price for being too early, too different, and too human in its ambition. If that kind of forgotten innovation fascinates you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which machine you want uncovered next. In the mid-1970s, Suzuki launched the RE5 Rotary, a motorcycle that looked and sounded like nothing else on the road. To understand why Suzuki took this leap, we have to rewind to an era when innovation was everything. The oil crisis was reshaping global transportation, emissions laws were tightening, and engineers were desperate to find new answers to old mechanical problems. The rotary engine, or Wankel as it was properly called, seemed to hold the key. Fewer moving parts, smoother power, and futuristic credibility. Automakers and motorcycle companies alike saw it as the next frontier. Suzuki, known for small two-strokes and practical commuters, wanted to prove it could play among giants. The RE5 was their moonshot. Inside Suzuki's design offices in Hamamatsu, the mission was clear: build a rotary-powered motorcycle that could blend the exotic with the everyday. The company had spent years perfecting lightweight engines for their road and off-road bikes, but this was something else entirely. Engineers were drawn to the elegance of the Rotary's single-spinning rotor, its ability to produce a constant flow of power without the choppy vibrations of piston engines. They studied patents, borrowed insights from German and American rotary experiments, and began adapting the compact power plant for a motorcycle frame. The goal was ambitious: create a smooth, reliable touring machine that would define the brand's technological edge. The resulting RE5 engine displaced 497 cubic centimeters, small by car standards, but substantial for a motorcycle. It featured a liquid-cooled housing with a single rotor and a carefully balanced carburation system designed to manage both emissions and fuel economy. A tightrope walk, even by today's standards. Suzuki's engineers wrapped the Rotary in what they called the TC engine architecture, marrying their existing transmission know-how with this new combustion concept. It wasn't easy. Rotary engines ran hotter, required special sealing materials, and produced unusual torque characteristics. Getting the RE5 to idle smoothly, start reliably, and meet emissions laws required an orchestra of mechanical compromises and creative solutions. Then there was the design, the moment where Suzuki's ambition met the aesthetic of the future. Suzuki hired Giorgetto Giugiaro, one of the most respected industrial designers in the world, to make sure the RE5 looked as radical as it sounded. Giugiaro gave it the tin can theme, a cylindrical instrument cluster and taillight, with matching chrome and black accents that echoed the Rotary's circular heart. To some it was bold and industrial, to others odd and overstyled. But the intent was clear. The RE5 was meant to signal progress, to show that Suzuki could innovate as confidently as any European manufacturer. Inside the factory, the excitement was electric. Suzuki invested heavily in training its dealers, even setting up seminars to explain how the Rotary worked. Sales materials emphasized smoothness, sophistication, and low vibration, key weaknesses in traditional motorcycle engines. Riders were told they could cruise at highway speeds all day without fatigue, that this was a machine built for the new age of long-distance touring. The ads leaned into a kind of technological optimism that matched the mid-70s zeitgeist: space-age fonts, metallic paint, and a promise that the future had finally arrived on two wheels. But the future is a tricky thing. In practice, the RE5 demanded a kind of understanding most riders didn't have. The warm-up period was longer, the throttle response felt unfamiliar, and maintenance required careful attention to specialized parts. Mechanics, used to the sound and smell of piston engines, were baffled by the Rotary's smooth whir and unique lubrication needs. Even the oil pump adjustment, a simple service task, confused dealerships unfamiliar with this alien powertrain. What should have been effortless innovation began to look, at least in the public eye, like overcomplication. Yet those who gave the RE5 Rotary a chance found something special. The engine delivered its power with a silky surge, free from the vibration and harshness that defined many large motorcycles of its era. Highway cruising felt refined, almost automotive in character. The bike's stability was excellent, thanks in part to its weight and low-slung design. Suzuki had created something that rode beautifully but communicated poorly, its strengths hidden behind a cloud of misunderstanding and fear of the unknown. And there's another layer here: timing. The RE5 arrived just as fuel economy and maintenance costs were becoming deal breakers for American riders. Rotary engines, for all their smoothness, were thirsty. A big touring bike that guzzled gas while demanding unfamiliar care was a hard sell. Competing motorcycles from other manufacturers offered simpler, cheaper performance with proven reliability. Suzuki's gamble began to look risky, not revolutionary. Still, within Suzuki's halls, the pride was real. The RE5 Rotary represented the company's leap into serious innovation, proof that they could think beyond convention. Engineers believed that, with time, the Rotary concept could be refined, made lighter, cooler running, and more efficient. The RE5 wasn't just a product, it was a statement of what Suzuki wanted to be. For a moment, it seemed like the gamble might pay off. Motorcycle journalists praised the smoothness and engineering bravery. Collectors and enthusiasts took notice. But as the months went by, the cracks began to show, not just in public perception, but in the market itself. That's where the story of the RE5 Rotary turns from promise to paradox, a technological marvel that couldn't quite connect with the world it was built for. And to understand why, we have to look beyond the engineering and into the marketplace that swallowed it whole. How perception, economics, and culture shaped the fate of Suzuki's most daring experiment. When the Suzuki RE5 Rotary hit showroom floors, it was more than just a motorcycle, it was a manifesto. The brochures promised smoothness beyond belief, futuristic design, and an experience unlike anything riders had known. But as the bikes arrived at dealerships, the reality proved more complex. Riders were intrigued, even excited, but confusion lingered beneath the curiosity. The RE5 Rotary was a machine that demanded understanding, and the motorcycle world in 1975 wasn't quite ready to listen. Suzuki's challenge began with its own success. The brand had built its reputation on practical two-strokes, affordable, reliable, and easy to service. The RE5, by contrast, carried a premium price tag, pushing into territory dominated by established touring machines. It was heavier, more expensive, and less fuel-efficient than most rivals. Yet for all its high-tech promise, its performance numbers didn't blow anyone away. In an era obsessed with quarter-mile times and horsepower bragging rights, the RE5's refinement was a language few wanted to speak. Dealers struggled to explain it. The Rotary engine's inner workings defied the usual sales pitch. There were no pistons, no valves, just a spinning triangle creating combustion in continuous motion. Suzuki's training programs helped, but the concept remained too abstract for many customers. What sounded revolutionary on paper often translated to skepticism on the showroom floor. Potential buyers would admire the bike's sleek lines, sit on the seat, twist the throttle, and ask the inevitable: what happens if it breaks? That question haunted Suzuki's sales network. Replacement parts were unique, few mechanics were trained, and rumors of difficult maintenance spread quickly. Some owners reported reliability quirks, hard starts, oil consumption, or overheating under heavy use. Others experienced none of these issues, but perception was already shaping the RE5's destiny. In a decade when simplicity sold, complexity looked like a liability. Meanwhile, the competition sharpened its edge. Other manufacturers were refining their inline fours and V-twins, improving reliability while slashing costs. A rival's touring bike could undercut the RE5's price while offering similar or better performance, all without the mystery of rotary maintenance. Enthusiasts who wanted power looked elsewhere. Those who wanted smoothness could find it in proven machines. The RE5 Rotary sat awkwardly between two worlds. Too strange for the mainstream, too mild for the radicals. The press coverage reflected that divide. Motorcycle magazines praised the smoothness and sophistication of the Rotary engine, but criticized its thirst for fuel and heavy weight. They called it a bike for connoisseurs, not the masses. Reviewers admired Suzuki's courage, but questioned the practicality of investing in an untested technology at the height of a volatile economy. The oil crisis had left consumers wary of anything inefficient, and the RE5's appetite for premium fuel did it no favors. Yet despite the skepticism, those who rode the RE5 deeply appreciated it. The smooth, turbine-like hum at cruising speed was addictive. Vibrations disappeared into a quiet, confident flow of power. Touring riders loved its stability and the way it could glide for hours without the fatigue common to piston bikes. Some described it as a motorcycle that felt like a luxury car, odd praise in an industry built on visceral engagement. The RE5 Rotary wasn't about adrenaline. It was about refinement. Unfortunately, refinement doesn't always sell. Suzuki made a valiant effort to sustain momentum. For the 1976 model year, they introduced minor updates to simplify styling, removing Giugiaro's cylindrical gauges and replacing them with a more conventional dashboard to appeal to conservative buyers. The change made the bike look more familiar, but by then the novelty had faded. Inventory piled up, and Suzuki quietly wound down production after barely 2 years. The final units were sold at discounts that undercut their original price by nearly half. Inside the company, disappointment was tempered by respect. Engineers had poured their expertise into a project that demonstrated Suzuki's capability to innovate on a world stage. The RE5 Rotary might not have succeeded commercially, but it elevated the brand's engineering reputation. It proved Suzuki could tackle complex design challenges and bring them to market. That credibility would pay dividends later. When the company pivoted toward high-performance sport bikes and endurance racing, fields that valued the same fearless experimentation the RE5 embodied. Outside Japan, the RE5 found an unlikely afterlife. In the US, a handful of enthusiasts embraced it as a conversation piece, a mechanical curiosity that turned heads at every stoplight. Its unique engine note, a smooth, steady hum rather than a traditional thrum, made it instantly recognizable. Riders loved explaining its rotary heart to anyone who asked, though few would actually buy one for themselves. It became, in essence, a cult classic before the term existed. Over time, the myths grew. Some claimed it was unreliable, others insisted it was bulletproof when properly maintained. The truth lay somewhere in between. Like many pioneering machines, the RE5 Rotary required knowledge and care that most owners weren't prepared to give. Parts availability dwindled, and mechanics capable of working on them became rare. Yet a small, passionate community kept them alive. Trading advice, spare parts, and the satisfaction of riding something genuinely different. As years passed, the RE5's failure turned into fascination. Collectors began to see it as a symbol of unfiltered ambition, an emblem of a time when manufacturers dared to chase ideas that didn't fit the market mold. The bike's quirks became virtues. Its odd styling became iconic. At vintage shows, the RE5 drew crowds not because of performance, but because of its audacity. It stood as proof that Suzuki once gambled everything on a vision of the future that most couldn't yet imagine. And in that irony lies the core of the RE5 story. A machine too advanced for its audience, too earnest for its own good. It represented a leap forward that the world quietly declined to take. But history has a way of rewarding such courage. As new generations of engineers revisit alternative combustion designs and hybrid technologies, the lessons of the RE5 Rotary resonate again. How risk, innovation, and timing define whether an idea thrives or fades. Which brings us to the next chapter of its story, the legacy left behind, and what it means for anyone who sees in the RE5 not a failure, but a blueprint for daring to be different. The Honda CX500 Turbo may have left showrooms quietly, but its influence never stopped resonating through motorcycling's DNA. In the years following its short production run, riders and engineers began to understand what Honda had really built, a concept decades ahead of its audience. The CX500 Turbo wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a manifesto for the future. It combined forced induction, electronic fuel injection, onboard diagnostics, and a fully integrated aerodynamic shell at a time when carburetors and air cooling still ruled the streets. The few who owned one discovered that living with a CX500 Turbo was like owning a prototype from an alternate timeline. Maintenance was unique, parts were specialized, and even today, few mechanics can tune the complex fuel system correctly. Yet that challenge is part of the allure. The bike's longevity and build quality are classic Honda, overbuilt, resilient, and eerily modern in its precision. For riders willing to learn its rhythms, the CX500 Turbo delivers a sense of mechanical theater that few modern bikes replicate. Every press of the throttle carries a tiny pause, then a wave of acceleration that feels like a time capsule opening. What was once criticized as lag now feels like character, a reminder of the analog limits that gave machines personality. Collectors began to notice. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, as nostalgia for 1980s design took hold, the CX500 Turbo found new respect. Not as a failed experiment, but as a prophetic one. Enthusiasts recognized its impact on Honda's later successes. Its approach to engine management, the integration of electronic control modules, and the focus on stability at high speeds. Those lessons surfaced in touring bikes in the VFR series and eventually in sport touring hybrids that balance comfort with intelligence. Even more broadly, the CX500 Turbo signaled a philosophical shift for Honda. It proved that risk could be noble, that innovation sometimes required accepting short-term failure to achieve long-term mastery. Without the bruises of the turbo era, Honda's later breakthroughs in electronic control and reliability wouldn't have come so seamlessly. Culturally, the CX500 Turbo also left a mark on the aesthetics of speed. Its sharp lines, digital displays, and space-age graphics captured a version of the future that pop culture adored. Appearing in films, concept art and design studies that linked motorcycles with the idea of technology as identity. It looked like it belonged on a movie set more than a freeway, and that image stayed with people long after the production ended. Today, surviving examples of the CX500 Turbo have become prized artifacts. Collectors hunt for original parts, and restoration forums obsess over preserving the factory-correct wiring harnesses and boost gauges. Each restored turbo is more than a machine. It's a historical document, a record of what Honda dared to attempt when the world wasn't quite ready. And in that defiance lies the heart of its legacy. It's not just about performance metrics or production numbers, it's about ambition. The CX500 Turbo's story endures because it embodies the tension between imagination and reality. It reminds riders that progress often begins with misunderstanding, that the first step toward the future rarely looks like success. When modern superbikes boast traction control, variable engine mapping, and adaptive power delivery, they're echoing the CX500 Turbo's core philosophy, that machines can think, measure, and respond faster than human instinct. What was once seen as overcomplication is now the standard. Every digital system tracing power curves or reading oxygen sensors owes a silent debt to the lessons learned in the early 1980s on that futuristic V-twin. The CX500 Turbo didn't just predict the future, it made it inevitable. Its short life wasn't a failure. It was the prototype for the age of intelligence that defines motorcycling today. And even though it never achieved commercial success, its spirit still rides with every engineer who dares to build something the market doesn't yet understand. In the end, that's the real victory. The CX500 Turbo didn't need to dominate the sales charts to shape history. It just needed to exist. Because from that single act of defiant innovation, everything else followed. Next, we'll bring this full circle and look at what the CX500 Turbo means for today's riders and collectors, how to approach ownership, and what its story teaches about the price and the reward of being first. The Suzuki RE5 Rotary remains one of the most fascinating contradictions in motorcycle history, a machine that failed commercially, yet triumphed philosophically. The RE5 Rotary wasn't just an experiment in engineering. It was an expression of human curiosity, of a company asking whether motorcycles could evolve beyond the familiar rhythm of pistons and valves. Decades later, that question still feels modern. The RE5 embodied the belief that progress doesn't come from playing it safe. It comes from daring to challenge what everyone else accepts as normal. For US enthusiasts today, the RE5 Rotary sits at the crossroads of collectability and practicality. Prices have steadily risen, especially for original examples with intact gauges and factory paint. A pristine RE5 can fetch several times its original sticker price, though riders seeking a project can still find restorable examples for far less. Parts availability, while limited, is sustained by a dedicated network of specialists who've kept these bikes running long after Suzuki stopped supporting them. Owning one requires patience, mechanical understanding, and a willingness to engage with its quirks. But for those who do, it's a deeply rewarding experience. Reliability depends heavily on maintenance. The rotary engine itself is remarkably durable if kept within temperature limits and supplied with quality oil, but neglect quickly takes its toll. Cooling systems must be clean and carburation precise. Most failures stem not from poor design, but from improper upkeep or decades of dormancy. Once sorted, the RE5 Rotary can be surprisingly dependable, offering a smooth, turbine-like ride that still feels futuristic. Collectors in the US often describe it as a conversation starter more than a daily rider. Its distinctive exhaust note and unique styling attract attention everywhere, but beyond its visual novelty lies a deeper truth. The RE5 captures a moment when innovation was emotional, a reflection of optimism that technology could change everything. That's why modern riders, even those who prefer electric bikes or high-performance sport models, still respect it. It represents the courage to explore, not just to improve. In the broader story of motorcycling, the RE5 Rotary teaches a timeless lesson about the cost of vision. It shows how even the most advanced ideas can falter if the world isn't ready for them, and how failure in the short term can seed long-term progress. Suzuki's later achievements, the dominance in sport bike engineering, the refinement of four-stroke engines, the precision of modern touring machines, owe an invisible debt to the technical lessons learned from the RE5's brief existence. For anyone considering ownership, the advice is simple: buy with your heart, not your wallet. The RE5 Rotary isn't a rational purchase, it's a statement. It's about preserving a piece of history that dared to ask, what if, long before such risks were fashionable. Whether it's parked in a garage, displayed at a show, or taken out on an open highway for the occasional weekend ride, it stands as a tribute to unfiltered imagination. The RE5 Rotary didn't just spin an engine, it spun a narrative about ambition, about how even failure can move an industry forward. In every smooth revolution of its rotor, you can feel that restless pursuit of something better, something different, something bold. And that's the real victory. Not the sales charts, not the specs, but the story it left behind. Because some machines don't need to win to matter. They just need to remind us that progress begins when someone decides to try anyway.